Let's do this because I am sick and tired of these debates going on Twitter. So let's do it on YouTube and talk about Arsenal's players' values. Ainsley Maitland-Niles could be worth 50 million quid to some, and to others only 15. So where do we actually stand? Let's have this out. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our Raw Reaction series, show in which we react to the latest Arsenal news, transfers, speculation, matches, whatever. What I thought I'd do today is, based off of a few discussions that I've had with people on Twitter, debating, arguing, and getting a little bit tense sometimes about the valuation of a certain Ainsley Maitland-Niles, I thought it'd be a good idea if we jumped on and had a discussion on YouTube and got your thoughts and opinions in the live chat and responded to as many of you guys as feasibly possible, and go through some of the players that are being linked with moves away from the Arsenal and what kind of fee we might see for those players in the future. So we're going to jump into the live chat throughout and get your thoughts. I can already see, LMJ, thank you so much for tuning in, mate, and saying that Joboslai is going to stay at Salzburg. I know, I'm gutted, okay? Let's not rub it in. I get it. He's going. He's not going, or rather, he's not going anywhere. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to him in a year's time. I'm kind of happy in a way that he stays at Salzburg. We move on. And talking about the first player that we're going to discuss, and we can only start in one place, and that is Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to throw to you guys in the chat box, and I would like you, just with one message, no explanation, no nothing, to put what you would expect Arsenal to, not maybe what you'd expect, but what would you want Arsenal to sell Ainsley Maitland-Niles for realistically in today's market? What are you expecting and hoping Arsenal to sell Ainsley Maitland-Niles for? What do you think he's worth? Tell me in the chat box. Now I'm going to throw up the best ones and some of your comments as well. No explanation needed, just pure facts and numbers. Owen Young, one of our fantastic members, and of course one of our writers. If you need to go check out Owen's fantastic pieces on the website, you can with the link in the description. Archie, 25 million. Obviously, Owen, I should say, said 20 million. Archie says 25 million. Isaiah says 25 million minimum. Rydog says 20 million. Everett Collin 5 says 25 pounds. That's it. Wow, that's cheap. Iron Cub says 25 million. Christopher Fung says 25 to 30 million. X Krieger says 25 to 30. Freddie McNay says 20 to 25. Easy Isle, who is our newest expert member. Thank you, Easy Isle, for signing up and joining us and helping support the channel. If you'd like to join the fantastic crew that Easy Isle just has and get access to exclusive content and, of course, the opportunity to appear on the show, then join up as an expert member as well. Brian Robles, another one of our amazing members, 20 million. Joseph Maseko, 30 to 35 million. Wow, that is a lot of money. Hugo says 35 million. Yaz Danny says, hey, respect to you too, son. Avon Teddington says 20 million abroad. 20 million to EPL is a premium when selling to a direct competitor. I'm going to keep throwing some of these up as we go through. Anthony Michaels is very, very ambitious. 50 million plus Messi. I think you're underselling Maitland-Niles there, or Mainsley, rather. Those that are new to the show, we are talking about Maitland-Niles, and of course he is known here as Mainsley. So if I refer to him as such, don't be confused. Let's talk about it. So, in my head, brass tacks, if we sell Ainsley Maitland-Niles for 20 million quid, I am fine with that. Completely and utterly fine. And let's talk about the reasons as to why. Since going through the academy, we've seen him go off on some loans, like Ipswich, for instance. He's come back, and whilst Ipswich was playing, to the best of my memory, as a right midfielder for the club, and then kind of that led to a future at Arsenal in the right back position, but he's also stated he wants to play in midfield. He's a versatile player, okay? So if we're looking at the positives about him, he's versatile. He can play in many positions. He's young. He's 22 years of age. He's English, which means he's got that homegrown talent that is a quota amongst Premier League teams, and something that is also expected to see increase. And you could see more homegrown player minimum targets set by the Premier League for clubs, and that is also an attractive prospect for teams as well. He's played some significant games for Arsenal, the FA Cup semi-final and final this season, where he had amazing performances against Manchester City and Chelsea. He was excellent in those games, and that would have definitely added to his value. Let's look at the other side as the reasons why maybe he isn't going to be worth the 30 million pluses that some people believe he should be going for. In the situation that we've got right now, there's going to be COVID. There's no point talking about anything else without talking about COVID initially. Clubs have less money this window. The clubs that are going to want Maitland-Niles are not the Chelseas. They're not the Manchester Cities. They're not the Liverpools. They're not the teams that are going to be in for Maitland-Niles. You're looking at the Wolves, possibly the Leicesters, possibly Aston Villas, and the sort of the middle ground teams, I suppose. Aston Villa is a lesser side in that respect, but still, those mid-table to challenging for top 8 kind of teams, Everton, Newcastle, these sort of sides. And those guys are not going to have the money available to them to spend 30 million upwards on a player that doesn't necessarily start for them. We take Wolves, for instance. Doherty is currently their right wing back. Does Mainsley get in over him? I personally don't think so. And for that reason, you're looking at someone coming in to be, again, a utility player, a squad player. And what club is going to come in for someone to play multiple positions and spend a hell of a lot of money for? You're just not. I agree with what Avon said earlier in the chat. If he goes to a team outside of the Premier League, and there's apparently interest from clubs in Germany right now for Maitland-Niles, and if that's the case, it would be even of a lesser fee because those clubs don't have the financial muscle, the likes of Werder Bremens, the Hoffenheims. They don't have the muscle to be able to compete with Premier League money. And so if he does move abroad, which probably would be Arsenal's preference to not have to come up against him in the league, you could also get little sell-on clauses and buyback clauses by selling abroad. Selling to Premier League clubs, they're not too keen on the likes of buyback clauses. But to European clubs, you have a lot more joy. But that does mean a lesser fee in the long run. And then you have to think about the counter-argument that I've seen. When I've looked on Twitter and I've tweeted out saying that I think personally, if I'm being just flat and honest, I think it's ludicrous to demand 30 million and upwards for Ainsley Maitland-Niles. And the response to that, and I'll give them credit for it, the response to that is when you see players like Dominic Solanke go for 80 million, Alex Iwobi go for 30 million plus, and people are saying this guy's a young Englishman and he's played a lot of decent football for Arsenal. He should be worth more than these guys. Now, that's where I take a personal issue with that because you can't just compare players' values. Because when it comes to constructing a valuation for a player, you need to look at a lot of different factors. You need to look at age. You need to look at nationality in terms of homegrown status. You need to look at the amount of years left on their contract. You need to look at the quality that they've had in the games. Do they fit the system of the club? Who are the buying clubs? And ultimately, the buying clubs set the value. The bids that come in for a player are the ones which will set the value of that player. There are sometimes anomalies. You look at Jadon Sancho, 120 million euros. That's what Dortmund want. Manchester United are getting close to that right now, and that's the reason why Jadon Sancho isn't going at this current time. If they stump up the valuation that Dortmund want, they get their man. But Dortmund always will drive a hard bargain because they don't need to sell. Arsenal do need to sell. And this is another factor, is if you're bidding for a player from a club that needs to make additional funds by selling players, that will bring the price down because they will want to sell and they'll be more willing to negotiate a lesser fee. So that also comes into the valuation of Ainsley Maitland-Niles, is that the club want to make money, and to do that, you've got to sell players. And you can't just start highballing the teams that can't afford these players with really big asking prices. So if you think about it, Wolves going in at 15 million quid kind of makes sense as initial offer. Arsenal reject that offer. They come back with maybe 20 million. Then we start to talk a little bit more coherently about a genuine value. If you're looking at Ainsley Maitland-Niles as the player that he is now, playing for, say, a Liverpool or a Manchester City, and say he was starting, same quality, same player, but these clubs don't need to sell in order to make money. And they can play hard, they could play a more hardball game with them. They could say, and that's why you see the likes of Jordan Ibe go from Liverpool for 15 million quid or whatever it was, because Liverpool didn't need to sell him. They didn't have to. But when someone came in with a decent fee, they were more than willing to let him go. But the thing is with Arsenal is that we need to sell to make money. And that means clubs are going to know that and going to come in and demand that. It's the same way that when clubs know that you yourselves need to sign a player need to sign someone because you're desperate to sign them, they can bump the price up, which means you might end up overpaying for a player. At the end of the last window, Alex Iwobi left Arsenal for a fee which I thought was crazy. Over 30 million quid for Alex Iwobi was a massive fee. And because it was right at the end of the window, Everton couldn't no longer get Zaha, like we couldn't, because we couldn't afford the price, and they desperately needed someone. And Arsenal could turn around, who didn't need to sell Iwobi, and say, look, you can have him, but you're going to have to pay a big fee to get him. And they were willing to do that. So to make the comparison between Iwobi at the end of the window to a club that was desperate to sign him, compared to now, for a player that Arsenal are desperate to get money for, it's a completely different scenario. They're not compatible as comparisons. So for me, that's why all those factors will boil down to mean that Ainsley Maitland-Niles is worth between 20 and 25 million pounds to a club, because the clubs that are going to be able to pay that aren't going to be going above that. The clubs that are going to want to sign him aren't going to be spending more than 30 million quid on him, because the teams that can afford to spend the 30 million quid and upwards on a player like Ainsley Maitland-Niles, and I'm not talking about like the Leeds, because Leeds have gone out and bought Rodrigo for, I think it's 30 million euros. They can afford to buy an experienced Spanish international forward that has scored goals for Valencia, not as many as I feel he should have done, but someone that's played consistently at the top level in La Liga is going to be worth more. A 22-year-old that's not had a full season of consistent, regular first-team football is not going to be worth that amount of money, even as an Englishman playing at a big club. You need to factor in all of those things before we come up with a value. So for me, 20 to 25 million. So I saw a lot of people in there looking at it and saying like that you think they're worth more than 30 million. Let's go to some of your comments. Zaid says, Tom, comparing him to Jordan Ibe isn't really accurate. And let me just say the first thing. I didn't compare him to Jordan Ibe whatsoever. I used Jordan Ibe as an example of a club like Liverpool that didn't need to sell a player. They didn't need to sell Jordan Ibe at all. He could have stayed in the team. He could have developed. He could have possibly gone to the first team in the future. Probably very unlikely, but he could have done. But Liverpool were not in a position that they needed to make money. And so therefore, Jordan Ibe was able to go for a decent-sized fee because Liverpool could play hardball with Bournemouth. It's as simple as that. I wasn't comparing Ainsley Maitland-Niles to Jordan Ibe. I was using Jordan Ibe as an example of a case study where a club don't need to sell a player, and that's why you can get a premium on them. But he goes on to say, Ainsley Maitland-Niles have played for several games for Arsenal. We should demand more than 20 million quid. I'm not saying that we shouldn't demand that. Arsenal could turn around to the club and say, no, we want 25 million plus. And the clubs that want to buy him could turn around and say, well, we're not going to give you that. And then if no one else comes in, Arsenal look a bit silly because they've wanted to move the player on. You might not want them to. Mikel Arteta might not want them to. But Edu and Vinay and the people that are making the key decisions at the club may look at Ainsley Maitland-Niles as a sellable asset of the club and know that they're not going to get any more than 25 million coming in. And so if they get that, they'll accept that bid. Let's get some more of your comments. Iron Cub says, I think a set fee of 20 million, then the add-ons is good. But if 20 million is included in add-ons, I wouldn't take it. And I'm probably inclined to agree with that. 15 million quid plus add-ons, Arsenal need money now. So we need to make sure that we are guaranteed a lot of that 20 million quid, if not all of it, maybe more, up front straight away so it can be reinvested into the team. That's going to curtail the Ainsley Maitland-Niles section. Moving on to our second player being Said Kolasinac. Said Kolasinac. You know what I like, player pronunciation. In the chat box, let's have your thoughts on Kolasinac's value. How much do you think he is worth? 10 million, 15 million, 20 million? You let me know how much. Roma is the team that want him. The rumoured fee is 15 million quid. Is that correct for Kolasinac? You let me know. Owen Young says 10 to 15 million pounds. Muzi says 14 million pounds. Freddie says 10 million pounds. Zamir says 15 to 20 million pounds. T. Irving is going very cheap at 7 million quid. Peace Tembo says 15 million pounds. Callistus says 15 to 20. Dave says 18. Salaf says I'd be getting 20 million plus a buyback option. I'm assuming that's for Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Joseph says Kolasinac is worth 10 to 50 million. Farah B reckons 30 million for Kolasinac. L says 50. Wow, I think we're going and playing a bit too much FIFA these days. Brian Robles says 15 million. Rydog says 5 million. Wages cleared is more valuable than a fee. And Rydog brings up a fantastic point as we go into our next player, is the wages of a player also have an impact on the player's value. You look at Mesut Ozil. Arsenal are desperate to move him on, to the point where they'd let him go for free at this point, just to remove the 350 grand a week wages. But there's no suitors at that fee. There's no suitors at that type of wage, because no one's going to pay Mesut Ozil 350 grand a week, even if it means you're getting him on a free transfer, because it isn't manageable. He's not worth 18 million quid a year. He's just not worth that. So if we look at Kolasinac's value, he's 27 years old. He's 100 grand a week plus to get off the wages. So you're looking at easily 5 million on top of whatever transfer value you've given to the club. So if Roma are coming in at 15 million quid, and he's 27, meaning that he's going to want to maintain that wage. He's going to want to maintain as much of that wage as possible going into the prime years of his career. If Roma come with a 15 million deal, it's going to be inclusive of wages up to 20 million pounds plus. I feel that 15 million pounds for a player that has played a decent amount of football for Arsenal for a few years now, has done well in certain situations, has got flaws, but has also played in Schalke in the Bundesliga and done really well to the point he got into the team of the season. And he's shown that at that level he can perform. I feel like he would suit that Roma side. Obviously, Kolarov's been playing that left-back role for quite a while now. Kolasinac would come in and do a very physical, quite like Kolarov is. He's got a lot more pace than what Kolarov does. And his passing's maybe not as good as Kolarov. So it's a trade-off between those two. But at the end of the day, I think 15 million quid for a player like Kolasinac is about right. When you think about age, when you think about the fact that you'll have no real sell-on value past this contract, you could sell him at 30 for, say, less than 10. But other than that, you're buying someone to come in and play for those 3 years and on a big wage as well. So 15 million quid, I think is a good return. And if you think about, as El says, he completely forgot he was a free player. We got him for absolutely nothing other than a signing on fee and wages. And that's why his wages were so high. At that time, to get any sort of transfer fee on top of Kolasinac is a win, our absolute win. So that sort of rounds off the class. I know that was a lot shorter, but the Ainsley Maitland-Niles stuff is a lot more detailed. If we then go on to our final player that we're going to talk about, and that is Callum Chambers. Callum Chambers has been linked with a move to Fulham. He's still recovering from an injury at the moment. He spent time on loan at Fulham, in which he got their player of the season when the year they got relegated from the Premier League. How much do you think Callum Chambers is worth in today's market? Let's have your valuations in the chat box. Everett Collins says 15 million pounds. I think that's more than the valuation that I would personally give him at the moment. Callum says 15 to 20. Owen Young says 15 to 20. Jared Carver says 12 to 14 million dollars in terms of that is. So you're probably looking at about 10 to 12 million pounds there. Mings on the mic says 21 million. Zamir says I'd rather sell Holland than Chambers. That's fair enough. Ronald says 12 to 18. Chambers 15. Richie says 10 to 15, also similar to Kolasinac. Zamir says 10 to 15. Oh, that's just gone off my screen. 15 to 20, sorry, says Chambers. Victor Edwards, another one of our fantastic expert members, says 12 to 16, depending on how bad his injury is and how Fulham want him in. Okay, so I will throw some more of these up as we go through. In terms of Callum Chambers, you have to think about the fact that he's coming off an injury, which is another factor. Injury records will also impact on a player's value. Coming back off a serious one like Callum Chambers means that will detract from his overall value were he fully fit. He is English, so you have to think about that premium, moving to an English Premier League club. But also the fact that Callum Chambers, if we look at his quality, is he an Arsenal quality centre-back in terms of what we want to achieve, which is top four and ultimately challenging for titles? No, he's not. He's probably not that level. He came in from Southampton for £16 million when he was very young. A lot of potential, playing at right-back, could play at centre-back and right-back and in defensive midfield when he moved to Fulham. So he's also a versatile player, can play in multiple roles. But the injury and the quality of the player and the teams that are going to be in for him are not going to be teams which can afford to spend big money on a player like Callum Chambers, who is a risk, even though he is versatile in English. And for that reason, a valuation of about £12 million, I think is fairly spot on. 12 million quid for Callum Chambers, I think you take it and you run, because you've got someone who's got a poor injury record now. Well, not poor injury record, although he has been injured a few times, it's fair to say. He's coming back off a bad injury. He's never, for me, shown consistent top-class quality as a centre-back and as a future possible centre-back for Arsenal. And for me, the clubs that are going to be coming in for him are the Fulhams, are the Villas, are the Leeds, these types of teams. And the fees that they're going to be using to get someone like Chambers are not going to be going any higher than 15, even though he's English, even though he's coming from another Premier League club. So £12 million for Callum Chambers, I think, is a good deal. Freddie McNay brings up a good point by saying Fulham spent loads of money on improving players last time they came up. You look at Jean-Michel Seri that came in. I mean, that was an odd one because he did really well at Nice, and now he ended up in Turkey. Things really didn't go well for Seri after that Fulham move. He was linked to Barcelona at one point, and the way that went downhill. They realised they need Prem experience, and therefore we can ask for 15 million, even if he's worth 10. I think Callum Chambers is one that you could be a little bit more cheeky with in negotiations rather than Ainsley Maitland-Niles. Say that if you want him, it's going to cost you 15 million. You might end up haggling around and getting between 13 and 14 million. So that's why. Rydog says, Tom, why is Kolasinac worth more than Chambers? Double the wages, older, less utility. He's worth more because even though he is older, he's in his prime. So you've got a player that's coming in the top of their quality. Kolasinac is still, I get it, he's got errors in his game. I understand that. But he's still playing at a top level for Arsenal, playing consistently for Arsenal. He was at left-back for a fair chunk of his time at the club until obviously Tierney came in. He was swapping out of Monreal. He can play multiple positions as well, playing at left centre-back and a back three or left wing-back. And even as an advanced left wing in sort of a defensive style behind, in front of another left back that's much more defensive minded when you're coming off the bench to try and secure a win. So he can play that role too. And ultimately, he has played a fair chunk of games in his prime for Arsenal consistently. And for that reason, that's why he is worth more than Chambers, who is coming back off an injury. The interest on Chambers is from clubs like Fulham, whereas Kolasinac's interest is from clubs like Roma and Schalke, who have a bit more to play with and are of a higher standard, I feel, than a club like Fulham. So that interest of those clubs also has a dictation on the valuation of the player, for sure. And that's why we get frustrated Arsenal fans, because if you look at the valuation of players that we go for, their value suddenly goes up because it's us and because we're going in for them. And you have to say, when it's like the Gabriel signing, for instance, is you hold your hands up and you say, fair play to the negotiation department for getting Gabriel in on a wage that was lower than the likes of Napoli and Manchester United maybe were offering, because he was sold the project at Arsenal. If you look at Fulham, what you've got to offer, say, Callum Chambers, or if you look at Roma and what they've got to offer Kolasinac, Roma have also just come into a lot of money, I believe, after being purchased. And so that will have an impact on the clubs will know that Roma have more money to spend. And so therefore Arsenal could turn around and, if you want him, you've got to pay this fee. We know you've got money, so come and get him for that price. So there you go. Zaid says, plus Kolasinac is an international player. You've got that as well. Definitely so. It's good experience. T. Irving says, why did Solanke go for so much money? We're paying for a player. The only thing that I can come up with for the reason why he went for so much is because Liverpool didn't have to sell him. Liverpool didn't need money. And if Bournemouth wanted him, same with Jordan Ibe, they were going to have to pay a decent sized fee for him. Are they overpaid for him? Ultimately, they definitely overpaid for him. And there are sometimes examples of teams that do overpay for players. And then that value gets set on that player. And then it comes up in comparisons. So that's why you can't say that Ainsley Maitland-Niles should be going for way more than Solanke, because the straight fact is that they overpaid for Solanke. So that valuation is not correct. It's skewed way over his real valuation, for sure. Robbie says, if Iwobi went for 35 million, Ainsley Maitland-Niles is worth at least 35 to 40 million. Surely, just saying, as well I heard we want 20 million. Again, we kind of covered this, Robbie, so you must have joined the party a little bit late. But the reason why you can't make a comparison between Iwobi and Ainsley Maitland-Niles is because when Iwobi was sold, it was at the end of the window. Everton were desperate to bring a wide player in. Arsenal knew that Everton were desperate to bring a young wide player in that had potential. And they could turn around to them and say, if you want Iwobi, you're not signing anyone else this window. You haven't got time. You've got negotiations with us. We've agreed personal terms with Iwobi. And if you want him, you're going to have to pay more than what Iwobi is worth. Iwobi was not worth 35 to 40 million quid. Categorically, period. He wasn't worth that amount. But Everton had to overpay to get Iwobi, who was probably worth, if we're honest, about 25 million quid. Probably about that much. But they had to overpay for him because of the situation they are in. So that, Robbie, is why you can't make a clear comparison between Iwobi and Ainsley Maitland-Niles, because the situations of the transfers were different. Arsenal were no longer in a position where they were going to sign players at the end of the window. They brought in David Luiz and Tierney. They weren't going to do any more business past that. But now Arsenal need money to do more business. And so that's why they are willing to negotiate a lower fee than maybe what you would have been expected to see if Arsenal were not in a situation where they needed to sell players. Ainsley Maitland-Niles' value goes up in a club that don't need to sell him and don't need to make money. Arsenal are not in that fortunate situation, and therefore the player's value will drop because clubs will know that they can pay for less for players when the club needs money. It's as simple as that. Exactly, and as Robbie says, Corona also has an impact on this as well. I don't think it has an impact necessarily on every transfer. I was talking to a friend the other day saying if you look at the market, the Jadon Sanchos and the Kai Havertz, their values aren't affected by COVID because the teams that are going to be paying the big fees for those players can maintain that money. They've got the income, the funding. They've got the big rich owners. They're big and rich as a club, and they've got healthy finances, so they can afford to go out and spend big money on Kai Havertz, on Jadon Sancho. It's the players at the other end of the spectrum, the players that are worth between 10 and 30 million pounds, maybe even 40 million pounds. They're the players that the values will drop because the clubs that are going to be going in and spending the fees of 20, 30 million pounds can't necessarily afford any longer to spend that amount of money on a player of that value. And therefore that value will drop because the clubs that are interested in them don't have that money. And the clubs that need to sell them can't afford to play hardball with those clubs because they also need money. So that's why you'll see a difference in the types of fees that you'll see banded around. At the top end of the market, not really effective because the clubs that are going in for them can afford to do that. At the other end of the market, where it is affected much more by Corona, that's by coronavirus and COVID, that's the situation where you're going to see more fluctuation in player values because of that situational fact. And that's just how it is. Anthony Michael says, all legit ITK saying one of Partey, Aouar and Thiago is being announced on Monday. Do you know who it is? Anthony? I don't. It's as simple as that, mate. I don't have a clue. I don't think I would put good money on that being untrue. If Arsenal announce one of those three, I'll hold my hands up. I'll tell you what, if Arsenal announce one of Partey, Aouar or Thiago, I guarantee you that player will go on the back of my shirt this season. And I don't want to do that. But I can guarantee you it's not happening. I just can't see it. I just think that a lot of people buy into these ITKs a lot more than what they're worth. It's just my feeling. And that's why I don't play that game. Chris P says, cheeky Guendouzi Thiago swap. Thank you for the donation, Chris. Really appreciate it, mate. I'm not sure, mate. I'm really, really not sure. I don't think you're going to get that. You might get Guendouzi going to Lyon, but I very much doubt you'll see him going to Bayern Munich. They just don't need a Guendouzi in that club. Iron Cub says, how are they going to announce one of those on Monday when we haven't even announced Gabriel yet? But we have seen that Gabriel was at the Emirates. We might even see a late announcement today in the evening. Who knows? Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. Matthew De Souza says, Tom, Socrates and Kolasinac won't go for any transfer fee because of the wages that they're on. Socrates, I agree with you. I don't think you'll see much of a transfer fee at all for Socrates. Kolasinac, different. Contract, still good. The players, or rather the clubs that are interested in him, that increases the value. Roma, Schalke, that will increase his value. Whereas if you look at like Chambers, the clubs that are in for him are like Fulham. That doesn't increase your value. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't. And Roma have just been purchased as well, so that would also increase his value. It's just about supply and demand. That's all it is. Supply and demand all day long. Why all the delay, says Avon? I don't know. I don't know, mate. It's as simple as that. Anthony Michael says, Iron Cup, remember to come back here on Monday. Yes, come back here. We'll do a show. Will we? I'm away. I might be back in the evening, but we'll do something. We'll just have to wait and see. Zamir says 20 million for Socrates and Kolasinac. Come on, Roma can make it happen, surely. Roma and Napoli are in for Socrates. I don't know why Roma would go for Socrates. That makes no sense. I thought their ambitions would be higher than that. ATMMS, that's a long name. Kartik, sorry. Tom, do you expect us to play the kids against Liverpool this weekend? Yes, I expect to see a lot of kids playing against Liverpool this weekend. So I expect them to also play a fair chunk of kids to the likes of Brewster and Williams, etc. So I do. Iron Cub says, Tom, I think that person the people said was Gabriel Aubameyang turned out to be a rapper who was making a song called Thierry Henry. Oh, I have no idea about that, Iron Cub. I have absolutely zero idea. Chris P again, thank you for the donation. Come on, Tom. Edu can sell Bayern on the Guendouzi project, surely. Edu can do anything, it seems, at this stage, mate. So I have absolutely no idea if he could sell Guendouzi to Bayern. If he could, that would be awesome. Ronald says, Tom, can we say on average Arsenal sell poorly recently other than Iwobi? Yes, you can say that Arsenal sell poorly. The players that have left the club just haven't left in the right way. Alexis Sanchez could have been sold a lot earlier for a lot more money to Manchester City, and we didn't take that. And instead we saw him leave and we got Mkhitaryan back in the process. Poor deal, poor business, and it just hasn't been dealt with properly. Gary Harder says, do you think Torreira is worth more than Mainsley? Fantastic question. Do I think he's worth more than Mainsley? Depends on the valuation of Mainsley. I think that arguably you'd say Mainsley's 20, 25 million. I think Torreira's probably a similar amount. And the thing with Torreira is he's worth that amount having played less because the teams will want him. He's still rated highly by a lot of clubs across Europe. Roma really like him. Napoli really like him. And I think that when you look at the teams that would get him, they have the money to spend on someone like Torreira. AC Milan really like him. And I just think that you would get a decent fee for Torreira and you probably would make back the money that you got for him when we signed him for about 23, 24 million pounds. So I think that he's worth maybe slightly more just because he's more developed and he's played now for a big club and he's played there consistently and has done well at times. But he hasn't done enough to be significantly more than what we bought him for. So, yeah, I think you might get 25 million plus for him, and it might still be in installments. Chris, you're so generous. I keep telling you, mate, you don't need to do this. You must be a millionaire. Chris says, our record transfer fee for a player is still over Mars. No wonder we are where we... What? No, it's not. You're just saying random stuff now. Gary says, how are you honestly going to say Torreira is worth 20 to 25 million? Well, Gary, Torreira is worth about 25 million pounds. It's as simple as that. I don't think you're going to get any more than that for Torreira in this market because he just isn't. He's not improved since moving to Arsenal, and we signed him for that. And he's also not in contention for the Arsenal team, and Arsenal need to sell. So that's why he's worth 25 million quid. It's as simple as that, really. Avon says, how do Atleti, Avon, don't do this to me. I know what you're doing. Get Marco Rocca for 50 million euros. Just how? I'll tell you how Atletico get Mark Rocca for 50 million euros. One, because he's got a buyout clause of 40 million euros and they've been relegated and Espanyol desperately now need money because they overspent in January. Two, Atletico Madrid have notoriously always been fantastically good at negotiating those lower end fees. When it comes to the higher ends, the João Felix is not so much. But those guys, Mario Hermoso and now Marc Roca, they are very good at that. And I think that getting a player from a relegated side like Espanyol, I think the fact that you as Atletico Madrid are in a position that they know that Espanyol will want to sell. They will know that Roca will want to move to them. And I think they're in a position where they can demand that amount of money for him. And if no one else is coming in for him, which I haven't seen yet, I've seen loads of interest in Roca, but I've seen no one with any concrete links beyond this Atletico bid. And if that's the case, Espanyol will take that money in the end. And you also have to consider that it's a La Liga club that's going and buying him from another Spanish-based club. And those fees just are not as significant as a Premier League transfer. You just have a look at like Danny Parejo and Francis Coquelin moving from Valencia to Villarreal for around 10 million euros for the pair. That just goes to show you the value between clubs within La Liga selling and buying players. The market just isn't there in terms of high money for these players. It's not until you get like the Barcelona's and Real Madrid's going for these players, because then the smaller clubs know that they can demand a bigger fee. The difference between that and Espanyol and Atletico Madrid is because Espanyol have been relegated, they need money. Atletico know that, and they can muscle in and know that Marc Roca's going to push for the move. So that's why you get the differences there. Avon says there, how on earth are we not in for Roca? I don't know. It's a really good question, Avon. He's available. He's really good value, and I think he probably would be about our plan C. I like him a lot. I think he would do a job at Arsenal. I think he'd play at the base. I think he'd play that number 6 role quite well. I think that Arsenal ultimately are just really pushing for Partey, and they're not really settling for anything else, but they still want to get him for a manageable fee, which doesn't seem possible. And they're in a bit of a stalemate now. So, I mean, there you go. That's how it is. Brendan says Chelsea have signed Ben Chilwell, and the fee is reportedly about £50 million. So let's talk about that deal, and that will wrap up today's video. 50 million quid for Ben Chilwell. Fantastic player. Consistent for Leicester in pushing them towards European football this season. England international. Played every single minute nearly besides injury for Leicester. And for a player of his age, in that good of a form, with a decent record at the club, that's why he goes for 50 million quid. And Chelsea are buying, and Chelsea have got money, and Leicester know that Chelsea have got money. Leicester knew that Manchester United have got money, and Leicester sell hard and are known for doing so. So they've got a good base to stand on. If Arsenal had Ben Chilwell, I don't think you'd see him go for 50 million quid to Chelsea. I think you'd see for him go for about 40 million quid, because Arsenal simply don't drive as hard of a bargain as what Leicester do. Also, Leicester don't need money. Leicester don't need to sell, which is a really annoying exponential positive feedback loop, because clubs which don't need money can sell their players for more because they can demand a bigger fee. It's like Athletic Bilbao, just Athletic to those Bilbao faithful. But Athletic Club in Spain can afford to just turn around and say, look, we only ever sign Basque players. That's their model. That's what they do. Fair play to them. It's an amazing system at Athletic Club. And when people come in for Laporte and come in for Kepa and come in for their players, you just aren't. Who's the other one? There's one other that's completely slipped my mind. But you look at Javi Martinez. You look at those players. They go for big fees. They go for their release clause because Athletic Club don't need to sell, and they will drive a hard bargain. And so the clubs that don't need to sell can sell their players for a lot more money. It's as simple as that. And Arsenal are just not fortunate enough to be in that position. Leicester are. Leicester don't need to sell. You know what's even more annoying is that Leicester will probably replace Chilwell with a fantastic player in a fantastic deal because they've got the money to be able to negotiate and negotiate well. It's an annoying feedback loop. It really, really is. And it's a shame that Arsenal have really put themselves into a position that means they can't negotiate really well for these players. And that's why we overpay. Fernando Llorente, Enrico is another one. Yeah, 100%, mate. So, yeah, that's where my head's at on that. Thank you ever so much, people, for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed the chat. If you have, drop it a like. Just because you don't agree with what I say doesn't mean you don't appreciate the debates and the arguments and the discussions that go on here. So please drop a like on the video. I'm always open to have chats with people about anything. Even if I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, you can always come on here and have a level-headed chat about things always. We uploaded a video earlier on today. It's on the channel. We're talking about Thiago with Brian Ryan. Fantastic guy. Go check out the video. There's also a new article up on the website about Thomas Partey and about the deal not happening and how Arsenal should tackle that. If you want to see that, link in the description. Go on thegoonertalk.com, read some of the articles. It's fantastic stuff over there with myself, Owen, Drew, and John commanding some really fantastic pieces. So, yeah, it's been a pleasure chatting to you as it always has. Follow us over on Twitter at thegoonertalk.tv. I'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.